This is James Kalm, the Lynda Bike, and we're coming to you today from the Museum of Modern Art. We're going to take a look at an exhibition. It's been organized by Anne Umland, curator for the Department of Painting and Sculpture, and we're going to have a little walkthrough by Anna Temkin of a show called What is Painting? Let's check it out. Okay, here we are at the What is Painting exhibition.
Now, the first thing that I'll mention in terms of this show to become immediately apparent to you is that there is an architectural grid imposed on the installation that actually has a message. What Anne has done is made this gallery of about 8,000 square feet into 12 rooms of equal size. And in those 12 rooms, there are 4 walls, and on each of their 4 walls, there is always one paint against a historical sense, a historical tendency to give greater influence or greater emphasis to certain trends than to others, to make a clear, as is often done at installations in this very building, that here's the important work, and here's the sort of less important work, or here's the really big deal artist, and here's the artist who happens to come along also. Instead, it's all equal. And really, her purpose in doing that was to say that your own judgments about which of these paintings is more important or more interesting are all equally valid. The first gallery here starts off, which in a way that gives you the idea of the kind of revisionist approach that Anne is trying to open people up to, in that it presents figurative work. And that MoMA, as you probably know, has long been associated with the triumph, if you want to say, of abstraction. And here are 4 paintings, all from the 60s, with the Guston from the 70s, that are about the body or about the figure or about the object. Here you have Lozano, a painter, a woman who in the 1960s in New York was a very important person, took herself out of the art world in 1970, moved to Texas, had nothing to do with art, and her reputation suffered as a result of her remove. In the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a real resurgence of interest. You can see this is a camera. Similarly, you have going on at the exact same time somebody working in very small scale via Selman with this gun pointing, as Anne has nicely done for the installation, right at the question that John Baldessari poses in the gallery over there, what is painting? Philip Guston, Philip Pearlstein using a photorealistic tactic to think about bodies, what's inside bodies, openings in bodies, more or less simultaneous artists. To what we might call a conceptual approach to painting that is epitomized by this definition of John Baldessari.
What is painting? Do you sense how all parts of a good picture are involved with each other, not just placed side by side? Art is a creation for the eye and can only be hinted at with words.
Who, as you all may know, began as a painter in the 60s, and soon after making this particular painting, gave up painting and became a photographer and a conceptual artist. Other conceptual artists at the time who gave up painting, in a sense, are behind you, Marcel Broodthaers in Brussels, who here in the style, in the approach really of Magritte, another Belgian artist of the 60s, of this century, but of the 20s and 30s really, is taking the figure of the artist, now not in a bowler hat anymore, but this is Broodthaers' very distinct profile, asking the question, what is it that makes painting in a very different way from first appearance of a photograph? You might say, what is a Barbara Kruger doing in this space? Well, of course, the message is very pertinent to painting, and of course behind it you have what's thought of as one of the quintessential paintings of all art history, God and man meeting in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. And then more questionable painting in the room next door here. This happens to be 4 women artists, although that's not the point of the room. You have Lee Bontecou, Dorothea Rothburn, Jackie Windsor, and Lynda Benglis. What we were thinking about in terms of this room really was that what are the 2 things that people might normally say make a painting? Paint and the picture plane, whether it's a canvas or a stretcher or whatever. And in each of these 4 works of art, the artist is thinking about the picture plane, but not making a picture. And instead dealing with that picture plane as something real, as a piece or an object-like sense of material, and taking it in terms of that material rather than in terms of some kind of illusionistic image. So whether you have the materials of Rothburn kind of very flat, or the materials of Bontecou making this sort of infinite depth through that opening, the expectations that you bring toward looking at a painting, you carry toward these. Even with me, I don't know, this is just personal in the sense with the Benglis of almost like a crucifixion, you're carrying those expectations with you, but then they are somehow being twisted or questioned by what the artist is doing on the wall. You could also label this particular gallery what is sculpture, of course, because equally these are all radically redefining what sculpture is. Even going on in this gallery is photography, the role of photography in painting. As I mentioned, photography is one of the things that has been discussed as something that has sort of overthrown painting as an important medium in our time. But of course, painters have not just sort of run away screaming from photography, but have imported it into their own work one way or another, and here are 4 different ways. Obviously, Chuck Close modeling his paintings on a blow-up of a black and white photograph, enlarging them to such a degree that it has a sort of grotesqueness, even though in the photograph size it would just seem like a pretty normal face and not have any of the sort of surreal, hyper-realism that it has here in the huge painting. Much later, this is just a recent painting by Gerhard Richter of him and a friend of the art critic Benjamin Buchloh in front of the cathedral in Cologne, where Richter is playing with the blurriness that as a painter he can enforce on a photograph, which of course can be as crisp and clear as you want. John Currin, a young New York artist who is also drawing on photographic sources for these 2 people. In fact, that background scene comes from a real estate brochure. So it's not only high art photographs or photographs that the artist has made that inspire art, but whatever you come across in, what's called our media-saturated society. And then provocatively, Cindy Sherman herself, reigning over these objects. In this room, history comes in. History, again, is something we put it next to the photography room. Because a lot of times people think that photography has replaced painting as the medium that can deal with history, but that is not at all true, and where it particularly has not been true is in Germany. Here you have A.R. Penck in this painting Eau de Cologne, making a pun on the idea of perfume, but also the city of Cologne, which is where Western art was based, and Cologne had a fantastic artistic renaissance in the 60s. Obviously, in this picture by Anselm Kiefer, you have the echoes of German mythology of the woodland, and even, although at the one hand you have this kind of country scene with this barn-like attic, you also think of Albert Speer's architecture, inevitably, I think, and that would not be accidental on Kiefer's part. Sigmar Polke, this funny picture of Mao, made at the same time, by the way, that Andy Warhol was painting his Mao portraits. You don't know if Mao is sort of winking out from all of that juxtaposed, layered imagery, sort of in a smiling way, or laughing at everything that's been going on. George Baselitz, turning painting upside down with the very obvious technique of turning the subject upside down. German painting, again, he was in East Germany when he was making this on its head in order to say we have to reinvent perhaps not only painting, but perhaps history in Germany in the 20th century.